This interview was recorded on October 26, 2020. Hi, I'm Len Epp from LeanPub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Erik Hougaard. Based in Vancouver, Erik is managing partner at eFocus Canada, a Canadian Microsoft partner developing products and solutions with Dynamics 365 Business Central, and he has been part of the Microsoft Dynamics NAV community, or NAV community, since 1990, having worked on a wide array of systems and projects over the years. You can follow him on Twitter at eHougaard, and that's EHOUGAARD, and check out his website at hougaard.com. Erik is the author of the LeanPub book, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central Field Guide, a comprehensive companion book for implementing Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central for end users, super users, and administrators. In this interview, we're going to talk about Erik's background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience as a self-published author. So thank you, Erik, for being on the Front Matter podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people to talk a little bit about their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you first became interested in computers and technology.
Well, as soon as I have said a few words, you'll realize that my accent is not a native English. So I'm actually Danish, and been living in Canada for the last 6+ years. But yeah, grew up in Denmark and started playing with computers from when I was I was a kid, and got into programming quite early because my dad chose to get. This is the early 80s, I'm old. My dad used to get one of the first PCs, IBM PCs that came around. And of course I wanted to play games like any other kid. And there were a few games on the PC. Now, we had King's Quest, we have Frogger, we had the very first flight simulator. Now, recently the new version is out, but the very first one. But other than that, there weren't really that many games for the PC. But it had a basic interpreter, so I started learning basics so I could write the games I wanted to play. And that, well, it took on a life of itself, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you remember this? I've asked this question of many people, and they everyone has their own timeline. What do you remember the model of the computer?
So this was the IBM 5150 with 256 kilobytes of RAM, 2 floppy drives, the CGI 4-color monitor, and the IBM Pro printer, which was a rebadged Epson FX80 printer. So yeah, I do remember.
I was happy to hear you bring up King's Quest. That made me very nostalgic. I don't know if everyone...
It was an awesome game.
It was, and it's interesting. I'm still kind of traumatized from those days when you had like the true death. In games where if you died, it was kind of over. You could lose progress, if the power went out or something like that. I still remember I think the very first King's Quest game I played was just like gold colored. Like it wasn't multicolored.
So it was out on many platforms. I think the one I played was CGA, so 4 colors.
Right. But, okay.
Very limited still.
Yeah. Not to go down too much down this sort of like nostalgia gaming path, but there was something I remember that from that game, which I believe was that there was a bug in the spelling of the name Rumpelstiltskin. So in order to get past a certain challenge, you had to spell Rumpelstiltskin backwards, but the game was actually at a certain version, the game had a bug in it where the name had been misspelled. So the only way to progress past that point was to actually recreate the bug.
So that name was a way bigger challenge sitting in Denmark. I had no idea that anyone was called that. So that was the only place we had to cheat. And this was before the internet, so it was kind of difficult to find the cheat. I think it was in a magazine at some point.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of magazines, so you said you started programming games and stuff yourself. Did you just do it from scratch, or did you go off programs that you found in magazines and things like that?
I kind of just went at it. The magazines was actually great because at some point I figured out that if you sent in your program listings to them, they'll send a the Danish equivalent of $100 back. So I guess that was probably my very, very first publishing thing, because you wrote a small program, a small game, and sent it to the magazine. They printed it and sent you money. So
that must have been really exciting.
Yeah, that was fun. It was a great time in IT at that point. All times so probably great, but I had a lot of fun.
And what was your first job in IT?
You got time for a small story here, I guess.
Sure.
So I was playing with my PC at home and doing all sort of stuff on that, and then in the Danish school system at that time, when you're in grade 9, you can have a week as an intern in a company. That's part of the grade 9 thing. We were part of that time. So a buddy of mine's dad was head of an IT department in a big company in a local town. And so I got like this intern job there to kind of help them with the PCs, because that was a mainframe installation at the time, and PCs were mostly for fun, and the IT people didn't really consider PCs a real computer. So it was fine. A school kid came in and I could install stuff and I could keep those PCs running. So after that week, they kind of offered me a job, after school job, just helping out with the PCs, which I did all through high school. And then at the end of high school, I didn't really exactly know what I wanted to do. And then one day the phone rang, and this was a guy who said, "Hey, Erik, that program you wrote for me, what was the language?" And this was at this company. There was a guy who apparently, this is before a lot of things. So he at a certain time, he had for a couple of months, he had to go into work every night at 10 to upload a file to the mainframe in order to run a process, handling some, I can't remember what it did. So I wrote a program for him that will automatically upload that file to the mainframe. And apparently I told him that the language I did that in was Turbo Pascal at the time. So I answered him, "Yeah, that was in Turbo Pascal." He said, "Do you mind coming up for a job interview next week?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" And that turned out to be IBM at that point, that had just announced a new ERP system.
Enterprise Resource Planning.
Yeah, accounting system. For the sake of the story, called Navision. And they needed somebody to, this was at a partner who were working with IBM, that needed to integrate this new accounting system with a IBM point of sale system, and everything was Pascal anyway. So they needed to find somebody who could do Pascal. At this time, this is in 1990, Pascal was the language of Northern Europe. Turbo Pascal is actually a Danish product. No, very few people know this. Anders Halsberg, who now did Delphi and did C# and now had done TypeScript at Microsoft, is a Dane also.
Okay.
So Turbo Pascal was big. Everybody did Pascal at that time. So I kind of stepped into the world of Navision, and Navision was at that point a IBM product, but not owned by IBM. And then they became themselves, and then 12 years later, they got acquired by Microsoft.
And they were Danish as well, right?
Yeah. So I kind of stumbled into everything because I used to program games on a PC.
That's a really great story. Thanks for sharing that. It's interesting. I don't know if I've ever spoken to someone who got, their first job in kind of grade 9 in tech. Although I have spoken to people who did, there's a refrain in the history of sort of, IT where people who get into it really early, like as teenagers, sometimes find themselves amongst adults who are like, you can actually do this, and get jobs where they're doing things that you just wouldn't expect a teenager to be doing.
No, so this was, that was a very, very specific time, the late 80s, where in a lot of settings, PCs weren't still not considered serious. If you were a enterprise of any kind, of course, you ran your business on a mainframe or a mini computer, IBM 3090 on AS400 or stuff like that, because that's what you needed to run a big business. But then the PC sort of, slipped in and took over a lot of things. And in 87, when IBM introduced the PS2s and Token Ring Network and all that, kind of validated. And at the same time, that's actually the origin story for what we call Business Central today, or Dynamics or Navision, same product, many names, is that at that time, because the introduction of Token Ring, IBM wanted to sell a multi-user accounting system in Denmark to begin with, and other places. But the only accounting systems IBM had on the shelf that would do multi-user were American. And American systems at that time could not do VAT, only sales tax. And currencies was not really supported, selling in one currency and buying in another, and all that stuff, which was the situation in Europe because every country had their own currency. So, of course, a European accounting system would have to support multiple currencies. So they looked around and found a Danish company that had made a great product, single use, and asked them, hey, can you create a multi-user version of this for us? And they did. And that is what we know today as Dynamics 365 Business Central. But it started that way.
That's really interesting. And so the multi-user aspect would be that you could kind of log into the same system with the same data from different terminals.
So up until that point, computers weren't networked. So if lots of companies, smaller companies, you had a accounting system, it was just sitting on that single computer. In accounting, that's where you had your accounting system. And if you needed to work on that, you would walk to the accounting computer and do the work.
It's amazing how far we've come. So did you ever study computer science formally?
Yeah, but at the University of Copenhagen, but I was too busy working, so I did some stuff, and then I kind of completed it on self-study on the subjects that interested me the most.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This subject comes up a lot, because people have their own ways into IT and tech, and so I always get asked various versions of the same question. But do you wish if you were starting out now with the intention of having a career like the one that you've had, would you advise your now younger self to take a full 4-year computer science degree, or to take a path more like the one you took with all the many more resources available now?
That's really hard to give a general advice. I think the general advice I would give my kids is stay in school. But on the other hand, they need to study something that they have an interest in, that they're burning for. Not just because we have to. I think for me, it has always been the desire to learn, the desire to figure stuff out, the desire to build, that has been the driver. And if I needed to build a compiler, I need to figure out how to build a compiler, and that's part of the university course. So that's a natural thing to go that way.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. Everyone has their own answer, and it is interesting. One of the things I've always found interesting asking that question is how seriously people take it, because it is so important to think about that. And some people are like, school was a waste of time. I wish I'd never done it. Other people are like, I regret not having done it. But everyone has their own approach to that. But everyone takes it seriously, whether they accept it or reject it or not. So the next question I'd like to ask you, I mentioned this before we started the interview, but one thing that we've started doing on the podcast is asking people about how the pandemic has affected them and what it's been like in the place where they live. You're the first person from Vancouver that we've had to talk about this since the pandemic started. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your experience has been like with, over the past few months in Vancouver, and how everything has maybe affected you and your business professionally.
So British Columbia has had a science-driven COVID response, which has been nice to see. We closed down our office in mid-March, like everybody else. I went home to my basement, and I've been here ever since. We actually, at some point a couple months back, figure out that we're not going to get back to a shared office space anytime soon. So we canceled our office lease and are now a work from home company until the world changes again. Business was a bit shaky at the beginning. Everybody's kind of looking out, so what's going to happen? Perhaps the idea of investing a lot of money in IT was not top of mind, which I totally get. But, after a bit of time, from that perspective, business is back to normal. The changes that we'll have, we kind of have to rediscover how to work together now that everything is online. But it also, and that's, I think that's fine. It's also interesting to figure out that customers are also learning that, okay, we don't need to get Erik on site to have him help us. I used to travel a lot, and of course I'm not traveling anymore, but in fact, looking at what has happened over the last 6 months, there's a lot of traveling that didn't happen and was not necessary because what we needed to do was accomplished anyway.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. So you weren't working remotely beforehand?
No. We had a office downtown Vancouver in one of the office towers, and shared office space with a couple of other companies, and that as management in a shared office space. Again, this is we talk about this a lot up here with kids in schools, the bubble management, how to figure out who to bubble with, and I can't ask my employees to go down and bubble with 70 strangers and share office facilities with them. It's not safe, and I don't want to do that.
And just a little bit generally about Vancouver. I haven't really left my neighborhood much in here in Victoria. I did actually finally leave the island for Thanksgiving to see a friend on Bowen Island, which is just off of Vancouver. And it was really interesting just to see, like, I hadn't been out in amongst the world, but in your neighborhood, were people wearing masks all the time and stuff like that? They certainly weren't in mine.
They are. I live on what is known as the North Shore, and in general, that people are very well behaving and follow the rules and so on. And we got thankfully enough space, so there's room to take a walk without standing in a line to get access to nature and stuff like that. So we're really fortunate to be where we are in a time like this.
Speaking of where you are, actually, before we move on to talk into the next part of the podcast and talk about your book, I actually wanted to ask you what led to you to move to Canada?
Adventure. So the the semi-short story is that my wife and I, back in the late 90s, lived a year in Florida, and that was fun. And we knew we wanted to go. We had to move back to Denmark, but it has always been in the talk that, hey, it could be fun to do something like that again, and before the kids were too old, because you cannot move teenagers across the globe. So an opportunity came to simply move my job from Denmark to here and set up a bootstrap a North American office of the company I worked for at the time, also called eFocus. So we did that as an adventure, but we decided that what we learned from the Florida experience was that we should never do something like that with a designated move back date, because then you're not really committing, as you know, to the local community and stuff like that. So we moved here. End of discussion, and adventure lasts until the next one starts. So everybody's enjoying life in Canada. Kids are enjoying the schools, and we're right next to the ski hills. And right now we're just waiting for the snow to come so we can start skiing again. And yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Was it actually? I'm curious. Was it easy to move, like to get all the paperwork and stuff like that?
That's what the lawyers are for,
right?
But no, that wasn't easy. But this is not a podcast on Canadian immigration law.
No, it just comes
we could do an episode on that. I have lots of input, but
no, it does come up from time to time, because I mean, particularly in the programming world, actually, people are often really mobile, and so I've talked to people about immigrating to Canada, from Canada to other places, and things like that. And yeah, when you have the benefit of the lawyers, it does make
it's complicated. I had the benefit of bringing a company in my luggage, right, which makes everything much easier.
Yeah.
That's too long a story.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I just to commiserate with people who've gone through it. They like to, know that it's everybody's who's moved has faced that challenge. So you've written a book, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central Field Guide. It's quite the mouthful of a name, which you actually invoked the name earlier, and the names of these things change over time, and particularly maybe at big companies like Microsoft, you end up with these long names. But we'll call it Business Central, like you do in your book. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what Business Central is, and you've mentioned a little bit of its history, but if you could just talk a little bit about what it is and how it's evolved over time.
So Business Central is an accounting system, which is not no longer the proper way of describing such a piece of software. It's an ERP system, which make no sense either, because nobody really understands what that actually means. And if you understand what it means, then it's enterprise resource planning. And that's not really accounting, that's something else. But anyway, it's an accounting system. It will do your general ledger, it will do your AR, your AP, your inventory, your warehousing, your job costing, and so on. Everything a mid-sized company needs from a management software perspective to handle your money, your inventory, your ongoing work, and all that. Business Central is the current name. It used to be and the naming stuff gets complicated. So Microsoft decided back in 2002, when they purchased two companies in Denmark, actually one company in Denmark, and the Great Plains company from Fargo, they decided and they had a CRM system in the works. They decided that all the business software should be called Dynamics. So it's like you're just using Dynamics, and then some different ways of describing Dynamics something, depending on which flavor it is. So Navision was the product name at the time when they purchased, so that became Dynamics NAV. And then when it moved into the cloud to be a true SaaS cloud offering, all Dynamics products that are in the cloud are called 365. And then to separate it from the on-prem version and to indicate that it's something new, it changed to be called Business Central, and we kind of like that name. It works well for the product, but it's a long name. But there were version of it at some point in time that was actually longer. So we kind of like it now.
And it can handle, as I gather, it's for small to mid-sized companies. What under that sort of definition, what's a mid-sized company? Like 100 people?
So I think it's actually easier to describe what it doesn't do. It's not a enterprise product, meaning that you will not use this to run Walmart. You will not use this to run very, very big corporations. And the definition of enterprise is also difficult. I think in Canada, Microsoft has actually labeled that there are 800 companies that are enterprise companies. If you're not among those 800, you're small to mid-size.
Okay.
So huge corporations are still in this bracket. I have done in Denmark worked with some of the biggest corporations in Denmark using Navision and Dynamics. Banks are using it and so on. So it's really sometimes Microsoft has the need to put things in boxes. And they have multiple ERP offerings. So they have put one product in the enterprise box, and then they're putting Business Central in the not enterprise box.
And it used to be, as I gather, that you kind of needed someone to hire someone to set it up for you at your company. So you'd hire consultants to set it up, but that's not entirely true anymore.
So and then basically now you're on the way into the premise of the book, meaning that you get Business Central. You used to only be able to get Business Central or getting Dynamics Nav from a partner network, meaning that a company has become a Business Central partner at Microsoft and has all the knowledge and the setup for doing that, and that was the only places you could get it. But now Business Central is just another cloud offering from Microsoft. So you can get it through any outlet that will sell your Microsoft cloud product. So all the added value, all the knowledge that's usually there when you would buy a product like this, it doesn't exist necessarily. I still suggest people to go to a partner with experience, but you can get it from any outlet who sells Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And basically the whole idea behind the book is if you go out and get the system, you will need some kind of guide to help you. Not a read from start on page 1 and then read until you're done on page 400, but more like, okay, let me look that up and see what's that about if I need to do job costing, or how do I handle backups or stuff like that. So the idea behind the book is to be a companion when you walk into implementing Business Central.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I hadn't quite put that together, but since given the history of the way the product was sold and maintained, there wasn't a lot of documentation out there for people that people could independently access.
Knowledge was within Wallet Gardens, where it was kept and nurtured.
Oh, well, that's really fascinating. That's some of our best-selling books are books where somebody saw, there's something missing that people really need. And, if you have that knowledge, then that can be really valuable. I mean, both to yourself and to other people to provide that. And when you really meet people's needs, that's when you've got a good book.
Well, so the content of the book is kind of, questions I've gotten. So let's put that in the book. So we have a saying in the company that, hey, it's in the book. Just go find it when people are asking something. But the idea is basically whenever I, oh, that's a good trick, or that's something that should be known, I add it to the book.
Yeah, thanks very much. Actually, that gives me a great opportunity to segue to the last part of the interview where we were talking about, your experience as a self-published author and things like that. And you talk on your book landing page about how it's going to be updated over time. And, in many ways, that's like the canonical lean pub type book, right, is one that can be updated because the technology that it's about can be updated and change over time. And you mentioned just now that you actually you ask people for feedback and questions and stuff like that. How do you manage that feedback? So you ask, you put your email address and your Twitter out there on the book landing page and in the introduction or in the beginning of the book and things like that. How do you manage those communications? Is it just kind of ad hoc? People email you and you just add it to the book and publish a new version?
So there is a new version of the software every 6 months. So Microsoft is releasing a new major version every 6 months. They're releasing a minor version every month. So the software is constantly developing, and that was kind of so. I got totally inspired by one of your other books, Paul Thurrott's Windows 10.
Oh yeah, the
Field
Windows
Guide.
10 Field Guide, yeah.
And the fact that Microsoft's coming out with a new version of Windows 10 all the time, so he's updating the book, and I said that's actually a great way of doing it. So that was, I had that Windows 10 book in the back of my mind, and then at some point, one of your, not really your competitors, but a traditional publishing house called me up and said, "Hey, Erik, we really love what you're doing on your blog and all that stuff. How about writing a programming book about Business Central for us?" And I said, not that convinced, because they already published 5 of them, so I'm not sure that why you need another one. And the offer they made was ridiculous from a monetary perspective. I said, no, I'm never going to do that. But then that kind of struck a nerve, saying, okay, but if I were to write a book about Business Central, what kind of book would that be? And certainly not a programming book, even though that's what I do. That's my main area of expertise. But what book is missing out there? And then that kind of turned into, it's the field guide. It's the book that will help users get to this system, perhaps without a partner, perhaps with a partner. And that at some point in my brain met with the Paul Thurrott Windows 10 Field Guide and said, that's it. So I looked up LeanPub, and that seemed fairly easy. So I started writing.
Well, I hope it turned out to be fairly easy.
Yeah, you got your own set of quirks in the Markdown stuff that it takes a bit of time to figure out what's possible, what's not possible. I do love so we didn't really talk about that, but since COVID, I'm not doing talks at conferences and all that. Of course, because there aren't any. So I thought I'll start a YouTube channel, and have been doing that a lot since then. And the process of being, I like creating content, but I do not enjoy editing. I do not enjoy pixel pushing and all that stuff. And I think so with the YouTube channel, I went with a sort of live approach using OBS. And the fact with the book and LeanPub, that I just create content. I don't necessarily sit in InDesign and move stuff around and stuff like that. I create the content, and then LeanPub creates a good enough looking book for me. I think that's my wife, who's an architect and really obsessed with, has to be correct and look nice, had a hard time accepting what LeanPub created, but then I asked her if she wanted to edit 400 pages of stuff, and she said no. So I created a piece of, because this is me, so I created a piece of software that when I do a screen grab, and I paste that into Markdown in Visual Studio Code. Then I have a creator program that grabs that screen grab and formats it into the right size and put a nice little shadow around it and stuff like that. So all screenshot looks the same, even though they're not the same size. So it's kind of automated. So if I need to add something, that's a good one. I'll find the chapter, do the T bracket for adding a tip and grabbing a screenshot, write the 2 paragraph and paste the screenshot in, and then push to GitHub, and I'm done.
Oh, thanks very much for sharing that. Actually, hearing about people's processes is always really fun. And, for people who are thinking about writing books, to learn about how, like, people who've successfully done it, their tips and tricks can actually really save you a lot of time and make your book a lot better. On the subject of formatting, that could be the subject of an entire podcast
yeah.
or a podcast series even. I mean, because it's part of the history of publishing and what the introduction of the ebook has meant. So for example, if you want your book to be available in EPUB and Mobi, you just have to give up on the idea of formatting control, because people can change the font size, they can change the font, they can kind of do whatever they want. And so, and particularly because LeanPub is, in progress publishing, although, making books look better on LeanPub is a hugely important thing for us in the future at some point. But, just good enough is good enough. And, one of our jokes is that until your book is done, formatting is procrastination. And we learned that, we know that from our own proclivities, right? You're sitting there working on your book, and then you're like, oh, let me get the formatting perfect. And then hours go by and you haven't written a word.
Yeah. And the problem with, in case of my book that's covering a ever moving target, is that the book is never done. So the concept of people buying it once and then be able to download updates is really cool.
And you do have a print version out on Amazon. And by the way, I'll make sure to link to that and to your YouTube channel, which I should have mentioned in the introduction. But no problem. How do you maintain the print version? So
the print version, I just use your export to print. The grayscales that you create are not the greatest. No, sorry. So you export with the colors, and then when Amazon is importing that and converting into grayscales, their grayscale conversion is lousy. So I actually go through a loop of printing to black and white before I upload to Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Because that makes the grayscales better.
Okay.
But that's the only thing. So I take that PDF and print it to PDF and upload that PDF to Amazon and be done with it.
And how often do you do that?
Well, now the book in reality is probably updated every 3 months. So every 3 months.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. The last question I always like to ask on these episodes is if there was one thing one feature we could build for you, or one bug we could fix for you, can you think of anything you would ask us to do?
Well, going back to the people can download forever. At some point, I think it would be lovely to have, that people could download for 3 years. Like my plan with this book is that I'll continue to update it because Microsoft is continuing to update the product. So at some point, should people get 5 years of free downloads, or should they only get 3 years of free download, or stuff like that?
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. The one thing I would say is we do have a sort of new edition feature. So when you create a book, you can go into the sort of admin tools for the book, and you can say, this is a new edition of a previous book. And then if someone goes to the landing page for the old book, they'll see there's a new edition. Click here to go there. And so the way people use LeanPub to achieve what I think you're trying to get at is, after a few years, they just create, but 2.0, and then people can go buy that one.
Yeah, but that doesn't really support the continuation. What I would love is that, like, let's say 2 years or 3 years or something, like a period from the moment you buy, that's when you can get the free updates. After that, you need to, buy an extension or buy a new version or stuff like that. But it doesn't really work if I put out a new edition that the people who bought the old edition last week cannot get the new stuff.
Yeah, it's not the same. They would have to have a new book in their LeanPub.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. I mean, it's one thing we might have at some point. It's something if we get really, if we have our own app again and stuff like that, is, just sort of have the book update without having to download an entirely new copy, which is actually the way it works now. So this issue of continuity is something that we have a lot to work on. And thanks. I think you're the first person who's ever suggested that on the podcast, but I'll definitely communicate that to the team, because that's really interesting. Erik, thank you very much for taking some time out of a beautiful Vancouver afternoon to talk to us here. And thank you very much for using LeanPub as the platform for your book.
Oh, thank you for creating it. I have had a lot of fun using it. So no complaints about the platform. It works tremendously well.
Thank you very much. And as always, thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the Front Matter Podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate and review it wherever you found it. And if you'd like to be a LeanPub author yourself, please check out our website at leanpub.com. Thanks.